Among pirates, you can find all kinds of individuals, from bloodthirsty monsters to freedom seekers. However, Jeanne de Belleville is the only one who became a pirate out of love. It's the year 1343 in France, when Jeanne de Belleville, a noblewoman, witnesses a gruesome event that changes her life forever. Her husband's head is put on display atop the walls of the city of Nantes. Accused of betrayal, the King of France in person ordered his execution. Jeanne is humiliated and shocked by the horrific treatment given to her beloved husband. So, in front of the outraged crowd, she promises that she will avenge him. It's not unusual for a wealthy noblewoman whose husband gets killed to pledge retaliation. They usually do so by raising an army. But Jeanne is different. She will not only raise an army, but she will also fight herself. And thus, she becomes the first woman in history to ever turn into a pirate. The Lioness of Brittany was born. Out of love for her fallen husband, she declares war on the King of France, and the once delicate noblewoman becomes a ruthless sea warrior. Like the biblical sea monster known as the Leviathan, she doesn't show any mercy to anyone who crosses her path. The Lioness of Brittany emerges as one of the most barbarous killers of her time, an absolute monster that inspires terror on the sea. But the King of France isn't about to let her get away with it. He is preparing to fight back, and he will do everything in his power to crush this troublemaker once and for all. Yet, nothing predestines this noblewoman to become a pirate. Born in 1300 in a town named after her family, Jeanne is raised as the only heiress of the Belleville dynasty. Soon, she is married off to a man from an even more powerful family. However, before she turns 30, her husband passes away due to illness. Jeanne inherits the wealth from both families and becomes the richest and most powerful widow in France. But that's not all. She is also the most beautiful woman in the kingdom. And I am not the one saying it. Those are the actual words of the king himself, Philippe VI de Valois. She is tall and has a great figure. And with her full red lips and round cheeks, she is the very definition of beauty for her time. So it's not a surprise that she has countless suitors. But unlike her first marriage, this time she is the one calling the shots. She has the freedom and possibility to choose anyone she wants. And after taking some detours, she finally sets her sights on the perfect partner, Olivier de Clisson. Olivier is also a widow, but more importantly, he is a very ambitious lord of Brittany. But Jeanne doesn't intend to behave like any other noblewoman would. She truly stands as her husband's equal with her own ambitions. And by combining their estates, Jeanne and Olivier easily become the most powerful lords over the vast area known as the Poitou. Together, they have 3 children and are working their way to becoming even more influential. But it's now the year 1337, and the 100 Years' War between England and France has just started. And sadly, this conflict will have terrible consequences for Jeanne and Olivier's plans. The Kingdom of France and the Kingdom of England find themselves in a state crisis. The King of England, Edward III, claims he is the rightful heir to the French throne. Indeed, Edward's mother is the only surviving child of the previous French king. Naturally, Edward thinks he should not only be the King of England, but also the King of France. As you can imagine, there is no way the French aristocracy can allow the crown of France to belong to a foreign king, let alone an English king. So, they find the next person in line, and that's how Philippe VI becomes the King of France. Obviously, Edward isn't just going to let things happen and stand back. In response, he sends an army to invade France. As if the situation isn't chaotic enough, the Duke of Brittany dies with no descendants. In this era, Brittany is an independent land within the territory of France. This is a real problem for France, but also a golden opportunity for England. Both countries, on top of the war, do everything in their power so that the new Duke of Brittany is an ally of their respective countries. As a result, tensions in Brittany between supporters of England and those of France escalate to the point where it turns into a full-blown civil war. But what does any of that have to do with Jeanne? Well, it turns out that Jeanne and Olivier's territory is located right between Brittany and France. Whether they like it or not, this position makes them a key piece of this conflict. Jeanne and Olivier must choose which side they will support. But the decision is obvious. They have been friends with Philip for many years, so Olivier goes to war against the English. On the battlefield, he isn't just staying in the back like many other lords. No, Olivier goes out front like a true warrior, valiantly risking his own life. His courage and fighting skills lead him to many achievements that don't go unnoticed. The King of France recognizes his talent, dedication, and loyalty. As a reward, Olivier is appointed Commander-in-Chief of the French army for a critical mission. The English have laid siege to Vannes, a critical trade center in Brittany. With each day that goes by, the city's defenses weaken. In response, Olivier is sent out to rescue the city with a clear objective. He must liberate Vannes from the invaders. However, not only does the siege drag on, but the English even manage to capture the city. And to make matters worse, Olivier is also captured by the English. But that's when the story becomes a bit odd. You see, Olivier is somehow letting go for a ridiculously low ransom. Although he walks away as a freeman, the details of his liberation are unusual. Why would the enemy release such an important man so easily? Something doesn't add up here. Needless to say, Philip can't help but start doubting Olivier's loyalty. But in the end, the king truly wants to trust in his commander-in-chief's integrity. After all, they've been friends for so long, and Olivier has done so much to support Philip. Unfortunately, undeniable evidence is about to make its way to the King of France and confirm all the suspicions. An English officer who had been away fighting in France just came back to his home in England. Upon his return, he discovers that while he was risking his life for the sake of his king, that same king was having an affair with his wife. Just imagine how this officer must have felt. Humiliated, he decides to turn against Edward by leaking secret information to France. Among the intel, there is a letter in which Olivier swears allegiance to Edward in exchange for his freedom. The King of France is devastated. Now it's certain. Philip was betrayed by one of his closest friends and most trusted military officers. Regardless of his reasons, Philip cannot forgive Olivier. But Olivier is lucky. The king's hands are tied at the moment. We are in a period of truce, where anyone who fought during the war is granted safety and complete freedom from both parties. So legally, Olivier is untouchable for now. But let's be real here. Do you really think something like a truce is going to stop Philip? Truce or no truce, no one betrays the King of France without facing the consequences of their actions. To carry out his revenge despite the truce, Philip knows he needs a plan. Fortunately, he has a few tricks up his sleeve. He plans a grand tournament and sends out invites to some of the best knights and most important lords of the country, Olivier included. They're all set to join the king at his castle in Paris. Of course, in reality, there is no such tournament at all, and the whole thing is nothing more than a trap designed to lure Olivier in. But Jeanne is a smart lady, and she feels something about this tournament isn't right. She warns her husband that the timing is a bit suspicious and she advises him to stay at home. But Olivier disagrees. For him, it would be more risky to decline the invitation. If he doesn't go, it would be like confessing he has something to hide. Besides, with the truth, what could go wrong? As it turns out, it couldn't go any more wrong. As soon as Olivier arrives in Paris, he is thrown in a prison cell. Accused of high treason by the king, Olivier's crime is so serious that the truth doesn't even apply to his case. And with such an allegation, the only possible outcome is capital punishment. Jeanne tries in vain to bribe a sergeant to free up her husband, but that's a lost cause. Just a few days later, and without any form of trial, Olivier is dragged out of his cell to the streets of Paris. In front of a crowd gathered for the occasion, he is brutally executed by decapitation. But the king's anger isn't satisfied yet. Even in death, Olivier will not be granted any rest. His headless body is exposed along with the worst kind of criminals and low-class peasants at the gibet of Montfaucon. But the horror doesn't stop there. While his body is exposed on that morbid structure on the outskirts of Paris, his head is shown everywhere in the country. And eventually, it makes its way to the city of Nantes, where Jeanne witnesses the unthinkable. It is August 2nd, 1343, when Jeanne stands in front of her dear husband's distorted and severed head hanging from the top of the walls. She is left frozen, her mouth wide open, yet no sound comes out. She takes a deep breath, firmly holds her young children's hands, and she tells them, "Look at what the King of France did to your father. Now it's up to us to avenge his death." Her voice is shaky, but her resolve and determination are obvious. She then turns to face the crowd, her expression shifting to a vengeful glare, and she says, "My friends, will you lend me your strength to avenge your lord?" Up to this day, the city of Nantes has remained neutral in this conflict between France and England. The macabre display set up by Philip isn't only intended to show what happens when you rebel against the King of France. It's also a reminder that it's better to be with him than against him. But this is a major political mistake. The news about the terrible fate Olivier suffered quickly spread to the other lords of the region. Rather than making the population more docile, they are scandalized by the sheer cruelty Philip has demonstrated. As a result, many locals turned their backs on the French king, taking the side of the English. Jeanne doesn't have time to mourn, as she is accused of high treason herself for her attempted bribery. But that's fine, she's never been the kind of woman to lie in bed and cry anyway. The King of France didn't just kill her husband, he also shattered all the dreams and plans Jeanne and Olivier had for building their wealth and prestige. Her thirst for revenge has no boundaries and goes beyond all reason. She will make Philip pay for what he did. And she isn't scared to take down the whole country if that's what it takes. No one knows it yet, but she is about to unleash chaos upon anyone who isn't fortunate enough to cross her path. Of course, Jeanne knows that she cannot do anything alone. But this is fine, because she has no trouble convincing her fallen husband's followers to rally for her cause. So, along with 400 knights, determined to risk it all, Jeanne begins her personal crusade against the French king. But she doesn't want to simply be the figurehead of the rebellion. She wants to lead it and fight with her own hands. For this reason, she insists on being trained in combat. Keep in mind, at this point, she is a 43-year-old noblewoman, someone whose entire life has been one of luxury and elegance. No one expects her to do anything else but order soldiers around from the comfort of her own castle. Yet, she is throwing it all away, every bit of privilege and safety, all for the sake of revenge. Hearing this, you may be surprised to learn that so many men are ready to follow her that easily. You would probably expect reluctance from men to take orders from a woman, especially in the Middle Ages. But the truth is, even back then, the power of command wasn't restricted by gender. As long as Jeanne is seen as the legitimate instrument of Olivier's will, her leadership will not be questioned. Besides, you have probably understood it already, but Jeanne is no ordinary woman. She earned the full trust of the men around her, even beyond the authority she represents. To them, her strength of character, determination, and devotion make her a person worth dying for. And so, the time has come for Jeanne to unleash her rage upon the country. Her first target is a castle just south of Nantes, home to a lord loyal to Philippe. The castle is surrounded by a dense forest when Jeanne approaches the main gate alone. She presents herself to the guards and pretends she needs to talk to the commander. Upon seeing her, the commander instantly recognizes a famous noblewoman. Curious? He orders to let her in. A terrible mistake he won't even have the time to regret. As soon as the gate opens, an army bursts out of the woods and forces their way inside the castle. The 80 soldiers supposed to defend it stand no chance against the numbers and the brutality of Jeanne's army. The battle quickly turns into an absolute bloodbath. No one is spared, and there is no point trying to surrender. Jeanne isn't here to take control of the castle, and she is not making any prisoners either. Death is the only possible outcome for all but one sole survivor who manages to escape with his life. Jeanne knows that it won't be long before Philippe is made aware of her actions. After what she just did, there is really no turning back now. It's only a matter of time before an army is sent out to stop her. So, in the next few weeks, she pursues her path of vengeance, leaving a trail of destruction, looting, and bloodshed everywhere she goes. But she doesn't intend to wait for Philippe's army to come to her. Even though her own castle is an impenetrable fortress, she knows that she won't be able to hold out forever. And no matter how mighty the men by her side are, they will never be able to compete with Philippe's large army. Facing this reality, Jeanne understands that there is only one path left for her if she wants to continue the fight. She has to turn to the sea, where the legend of the Lioness of Brittany is about to come to life. Out on the open sea, it's going to be a lot easier for Jeanne to cause havoc. Philippe will basically be powerless, his fleet having been wiped out in the war against the English. This is her golden chance to inflict damage that matches the extent of her hatred. She has to act fast, so she invests all her wealth to buy and transform 3 merchant vessels into dangerous warships. Powered both by sails and by men rowings, these 30-meter-long ships each carry a crew of 10. Out of her loyal following of 400, only the most devoted and strongest are selected to join her. But remember, she also has young children. What about them? Although she entrusts her daughter to a nanny, she fears that her 2 sons will be killed if they are found by Philippe's men. So the 2 boys, despite being only 5 and 7 years old, will be going with her. And so, Jeanne, along with her 2 sons and about 30 elite warriors, board their ships, lift anchor, and make their way into the open sea. The vessels themselves are a clear signal of Jeanne's hostile intentions. With their hulls painted black and the sails blood red, there is no confusion. Those are pirate ships. But unlike legendary pirate ships, there is no Jolly Roger flying on their masts. Indeed, the iconic flag will only be invented in the golden age of piracy some 300 years later. Here, we are very much in the early innings of piracy. And by taking to the sea, Jeanne makes history by becoming the first woman ever to turn into a pirate. But that's not why she will be remembered. Instead, her legend will be forged from the terror she spreads across the seas. During this era, the oceans are alive with plenty of ships carrying incredible riches such as Spanish wine, salt, spices, and much more. But for Jeanne, it doesn't really matter what they transport. Every merchant vessel she encounters is a target. And each time she finds a new victim, she shows no mercy, leaving no one alive. Dressed in a chainmail shirt and neck armor, Jeanne fights with a sword in hand, always being the first to lead the charge onto enemy ships. Once she slaughters everyone on board and loots the vessel, she sends it to the bottom of the sea and pursues her journey in search of another ship to raid. But all of that isn't done to accumulate wealth. She mostly takes food and drinking water. Her real goal is to destroy the reputation of the French king. And it works. The entire situation turns into a nightmare for Philippe, who finds himself unable to protect not only his own ships, but also those of his commercial partners sailing near the French coast. To be fair, Jeanne has established a brutally efficient attack strategy that leaves her enemies with no chance to survive. When she identifies the target, her crew pulls up alongside the ship, close enough so that they can jump onto their deck. Then, Jeanne and her men quickly overpower the poor victims. Showing no mercy, they cut down anyone in their path. After that, they take whatever they want. Finally, they sink the ship and leave the area. The whole operation is over in a flash. By the time another ship comes to investigate, it's already far too late. And with no way to send out a message or call for help, Jeanne's targets are completely isolated. The Lioness of Brittany has earned the reputation of a barbarous pirate, a figure of terror on the high seas. Stories tell of the merciless treatment issued to survivors. She would have their hands and feet cut off before throwing them overboard, leaving them to certain death. This period of tyranny goes on for months, during which sailors fear coming across the terrifying black feet of the Lioness of Brittany. But Philippe cannot let her get away with her crimes. He reaches out to the Pope for help. There is a crazy woman on a rampage, killing everyone in sight. She needs to be stopped, no matter what. Jeanne has become public enemy number one, and now the French king's retaliation is about to come her way, and he will crush the Lioness of Brittany. For all her crimes, Jeanne is summoned to a trial. Obviously, she doesn't show up. As a result, she is legally stripped of her rights as a noblewoman and of all her possessions. She is even banned from setting foot in the Kingdom of France ever again. Not long after, Philippe gives away Jeanne's lands, castles, and other properties to some of his loyal followers. But the French king is just getting started. He is determined to stop her with the same brutality she has been using. And now that his new fleet is ready, he sends them out, and the hunt for the Lioness of Brittany officially begins. It doesn't take long before they come across Jeanne's now infamous Black Fleet. Despite the overwhelming power of the French warships and the difference in numbers, Jeanne manages to push them back several times. But after several violent battles, her ships are damaged beyond repair, and she knows she won't be able to handle another confrontation. Yet, here comes the French fleet again, back against the wall. Jeanne has no choice but to accept defeat. The king's men charge with full force. They sink Jeanne's main ship and capture her other ships. The French assume she is dead and come back triumphantly, as the heroes who finally defeated the Lioness of Brittany. But, unbeknownst to them, the Lioness of Brittany is still alive. She used a small boat to escape with her two sons right before the last confrontation. But unfortunately, they didn't have time to bring food or water with them. They are lost in the middle of the ocean, drifting aimlessly. And after 5 terrible days, they are finally rescued by some English supporters. Jeanne has been saved, but this disaster proves to be too much for her poor 5-year-old son who perishes from thirst and exhaustion. Now in England, with her only surviving son, she is welcomed by the English as an ally. For all the troubles she's given to Philip, the English King Edward takes Jeanne under his wing and provides her with the basic necessities. And she's going to need every bit of help she can get. Not only has she lost her precious child, but she has also lost absolutely everything else. All her wealth, properties, and titles have been taken away from her. In this situation, even the toughest ones would collapse and give up. But Jeanne's tenacity is unmatched. Not only does she want to retrieve everything she's been stripped of, but her vengeance will not be complete until she becomes richer and more powerful than she's ever been. But at this point, she is painfully aware that she will not be able to make it happen with her current approach. She has to find another way. So Jeanne meets Walter Bentley, an English military deputy. The Englishman instantly falls in love with the audacious woman. Jeanne might be 10 years older than him, and she is now in her late 40s, but her beauty hasn't faded a bit. Walter is quite a peculiar man as well. He loves a lost cause, and Jeanne's story gives him a reason to fight. They quickly get married, and a new life begins. While she gives a proper education to her son, Jeanne can truly count on her new husband to pursue the fight for her. Walter has made it its own mission to accomplish his wife's revenge. He puts his own life on the line and slowly makes his way up until he eventually becomes a military commander. The truce has long been over, and the 100 Years' War has kicked off again. Walter is in charge of leading battles in areas that used to belong to Jeanne. And thanks to the English conquest of Brittany, Walter is able to reclaim some of Jeanne's lands. But taking control only comes at the price of terrible battles for limited results. Take the castle of Noirmoutier, for example. Walter's army is only able to capture the impenetrable fortress after weeks of fighting. The amount of struggle, lives lost, bloodshed, and sheer effort necessary to make it happen is barely imaginable. Yet, after all that, they can't even hold it for more than a few months. The same story happens again and again with different battles and different strongholds. Hopelessly in love with Jeanne, Walter keeps fighting on the battlefield. At this point, he is only fighting for her, not for England anymore. So much so that when the English king requires Walter to hand over lands that used to belong to Jeanne to another English lord, he simply refuses. Walter isn't stupid, he understands the gravity of defying the king's authority. But he also knows that if he starts giving away land like that, Jeanne will never be able to recover everything she has lost. For his insubordination, he has to face serious consequences. Summoned by the English king, Jeanne fears her husband will not come back. She has seen it one too many times. But Walter is not executed. However, he is thrown into prison for a whole year. Far worse is the fate given to the lands he conquered. Jeanne and Walter are stripped of everything, only left with a single property to their name. Jeanne loses everything once again, and after a life of struggles, Jeanne's perseverance has finally run its course. It's 1359 when Walter dies of sickness in their only home in England. Jeanne comes to reason with the idea that she will never be able to go back to her real home back in France. Overwhelmed with grief and sorrow, she passes away just a few weeks after Walter. At the age of 60, she leaves this world behind without having fulfilled any of her huge ambitions. She is gone, but this doesn't mean everything is lost. Jeanne, even in death, hasn't had her final word yet. She planted a seed, and now it's time for the harvest. Her son, named after his father Olivier, has grown into a man, and he has inherited all of her mother's strength, determination, and ambitions. Olivier has seen it all, from his father's severed head to his younger brother dying of exhaustion. He grew up through one traumatic event after another. All of that while watching his mother fight tirelessly for her revenge and her legacy. Like Walter before him, Olivier has made Jeanne's fight his own. But where Walter failed, Olivier will succeed. Not only is he an exceptional warrior, but he also understands politics in a way that allows him to avoid falling into the same traps his parents did. Starting off as a rising star in the English army, his talent eventually leads the French army to welcome him with open arms, despite his family history. Olivier is happy to betray the English and return to the Kingdom of France. For him, it's clearly the best opportunity to reclaim his family's lands, all located in France. Now fighting alongside the French army, he displays a ferocity and resilience that even his own allies fear. Once he is on the battlefield, nothing and no one can stop him. Not even a sword blow to the eye can prevent him from fighting and defeating his enemies one after another. His incredible achievements earn him the right to become a lord and retrieve all his family's lands. But his rise doesn't stop there. Olivier goes on to accumulate wealth and power beyond anything Jeanne could have ever imagined. Jeanne can now rest in peace. Her desires for revenge and ambition have been fulfilled at last. Even if it took one more generation, the final victory belongs to Jeanne.